Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this analysis I'll be discussing not only the historical and political context the story takes place in, but also about literature, all with the intention of helping players understand a bit better this version, since from what I've seen there's still a lot of confusion among the fandom about this version, about Folie et Déraison. Let's start with the location. Well, this version takes place during the 1990s in Argentina, Tierra del Fuego, mostly inside of Comala prison, the name being a reference to the town in Juan Rulfo's novel Pedro Páramo, of course. It is based on the real-life prison located in the oriental periphery of Ushuaia, a project presented to the Congress by President Julio Argentino Roca and his second Minister of Justice and Education, Eduardo Wild, in 1883. The objective was to build the base for colonization, extend the state's reach, and segregate and imprison immigrants, politicians, journalists, revolutionaries, and whoever the oligarchy deemed an enemy, sending everyone that couldn't adapt to their social hegemony 3,000 kilometers away from Buenos Aires to the most remote and inaccessible place they could think of. Built in 1902, it was based not only on the model applied by the English Empire in Australia, but also on the panopticon system by English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who proposed an architecture that will make the prisoners feel like they're being watched at all times by an omnipresent inspector in a central tower, with the prisoners' cells built around it. It's in this architecture that pretended to facilitate the appropriation of individual acts by authority that Foucault found the genesis of panopticism. In 1947, the prison of Ushuaia closed. However, in the game's alternate timeline, it was rebuilt and opened in the 1970s by the National Foucault Studies Association. The prison was also used by the military junta that overthrew the government in 1976. The country was forced to live under a military dictatorship that carried out kidnappings, tortures, and murders until 1983, leaving 30,000 missing people as a result of the dictatorship. Trials put a true end to it, paving the way to democracy, as 5 of the leaders of the military junta were sentenced to life in prison. Another event that's discussed extensively throughout the story is the Latin American boom. Now, it basically refers to the boom of the late 1960s that put Latin American literature in the international market, thus becoming a prestigious cultural commodity, mostly associated with the novels of Gabriel García Márquez, Julio Cortázar, Carlos Fuentes, Mario Vargas Llosa, Alejo Carpentier, etc. Boom literature made literary other forms of social production such as law, science, and anthropology. Some even say it Latin Americanizes Western culture as Latin America literalizes this same West, tearing it from its Eurocentric base. In this gesture we can find why it's subversive and liberating. Now, Octavio Paz tried to expand on this idea by claiming that in Latin America thought happens in literature and not in philosophy or political theory. This claim is a touchy one, one that plays into a Eurocentric prejudice. Let me explain. Basically, it says that the author, in this case Latin American people, can produce art, but they cannot truly think, possessing a natural talent or inspiration, but no reason that requires philosophy or logic. Literature, like music, art, or even athletics, is often placed in the domain of natural talent or inspiration, as opposed to those of thought and reason, slipping into dichotomies such as nature and culture, instinct and thought, or irrational and reason, that are key to the violence of colonialism. Magical realism, a key aesthetic mode within Latin American fiction, reveals that the region's past is too present, too strong to yield to myth, and at the same time it is too ineffectual and too destroyed to do without myth. We could understand it as poetics that strive to phrase the limit between myth and history, an articulation basically that is not reducible to either. Here we cannot find historical entities, but their wandering ghosts and material vestiges, unable to take their place and rest within history. Recoleta's character being a ghost of literature makes sense when we consider what I just mentioned. Another key element is the fact that she's not only a woman but an exile and an implied sapphic. In the first part of the 20th century, the rise of feminism was accompanied by an increase of women writers such as Julia de Burgos, Alfonsina Storni, Juana de Ibarboro, Maria Luisa Bombal, Teresa de la Parra, to name a few. These active writers contributed to the boom. However, their names are not mentioned in the story of Latin American literature, nor do accounts of post-boom literature of the 1970s and 80s name their successors. Among them we can find Isabel Allende, Luisa Valenzuela, Julieta Campos, Margot Glantz, Nélida Piñón, Rosario Ferré, Ana Lidia Vega, Alba Lucía Ángel, Elvira Orfé, Gioconda Belli, to name a few. In Latin America, women's literary history has been annulled. Exile and the feminine experience mark an intersection in the region, both occurring with frequency. Women and exiles have been rendered invisible in different ways. The warfare aimed primarily at rural civilian populations in Central America and the military coups of the early 1970s in Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay sent many women into exile. Now, there's some discussions in the humanities and social sciences about the end of both the state and literature. When I refer to the end of the state, I am not talking about its disappearance, but rather the demise of the sovereign state, since it now must compete with domains such as the global market, for example. The post-dictatorship transition in the region has led to an almost completed neoliberalism. Similarly, literature stopped occupying the privileged position it once had within the institutions of civil society and the state. It must now battle with other forms of creation, even if it is still being read today and appropriated and marketed. These two processes are very present in the story and are linked to the alienation of some of the writers present inside and outside the prison, including Recoleta herself as she struggles to finish her novel in this reality. Literature for her is radically connected to knowledge and social change. This is the case for writers that identify with some form of protest against the norm. There's a political commitment in the text and poetry she writes. And one of the reasons why she wanted to meet the visceral realists is because these groups' counter-hegemonic works inspired her. I believe in her character we can find a concept of poetry with a broader scope, far different from the bourgeois individualism of the United States. Poetry should be multidimensional, textured, and human. Personal questions such as love, memory, or sexuality, and political questions such as the military takeover of a country and the effects of that on the people should all be in play in Latin American poetry. I'll end the video with a quote by Uruguayan writer Cristina Peri Rossi about the relation between politics and literature. La literatura es una forma de conocimiento con sus características propias y siempre depende en definitiva, muy a la larga, a veces, del estado actual de la lucha de clase en un determinado país y en un momento histórico determinado. Si partimos de la base de que cualquier producto artístico ordena la realidad según quien lo produce, ya en ese orden, que es el artista al expresarse implícitamente, hay un mensaje que no tiene por qué ser político. Sin embargo, si podemos entender por qué una manzana es política, habremos comprendido por qué un cuento de Borges es político o un poema de Safo lo es. Alright, that's the end of the video. Like my previous video, you can find all of the sources I used in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I wish you all good luck and good health.